The hammer fell at exactly 3:47 in the morning. Victor Crane heard it the moment it landed, a single, thunderous crack that split the silence of his brand new bedroom and jolted him upright in his 1,000 thread-count sheets. He sat there, chest heaving, eyes wide, scanning the darkness of the room he had waited 2 years to sleep in. Nothing. Just the vast, expensive quiet of Crane Manor on its very first night. He told himself it was the house settling. New builds made noise. Everyone knew that. He pulled the covers back over his shoulders, closed his eyes, and tried to remember that he was the most successful man in the county, perhaps in the entire state, and that men like him did not lose sleep over strange sounds in the night. But the hammer fell again. Victor Crane had not built his fortune by being the kind of man who doubted himself. He had built it by being ruthless, focused, and absolutely convinced that everything he touched was the product of his own brilliance. So when he stood at the grand unveiling of Crane Manor 3 days earlier, dressed in a white linen suit before 300 guests on the Emerald Lawn, he spoke for 45 minutes about his vision, his sacrifice, and his extraordinary mind. He talked about the sketches he had drawn on cocktail napkins. He talked about the sleepless nights, his sleepless nights, spent imagining every detail. He talked about the legacy he was leaving for generations to come. Not once did he mention the 312 workers who had spent 2 years of their lives building it. They had watched from a distance that evening, a few of them, still in dusty boots, standing near the tree line at the edge of the property. A stonemason named Darius who had driven 4 hours each way for 18 months. A carpenter named Rosa who had missed her daughter's first steps because she was framing the east wing. An elderly painter named Samuel who had come out of retirement just to work alongside his grandson on the job. They watched Victor raise his champagne glass to the sky and toast himself. And then, quietly, they walked away. Nobody called after them. The first week inside the mansion was when things started to go wrong. It began small enough. Victor would wake to find a light on in a room he hadn't entered. He would go to investigate and find nothing. Just an empty room glowing at 2 in the morning, as if waiting for a shift to begin. He switched the lights off. They came back on. He called an electrician, who found no fault in the wiring and charged him $400 to say so. Then came the footprints. He found them one Tuesday morning trailing across the library floor, large, heavy boot prints pressed into the dust that had gathered overnight. They led from the doorway to the center of the room and stopped. Just stopped. As if whoever had been walking had simply ceased to exist mid-stride. Victor stood over those prints for a long time, his coffee going cold in his hand, his mind working through every rational explanation it could manufacture. "This is nonsense," he said aloud to the empty room. "This is absolutely ridiculous." The room said nothing back. But somewhere deep in the walls, something groaned. It was his housekeeper, Mrs. Adimi, who first refused to go near the east wing. She came to Victor on a Friday morning with her coat already on and her handbag clutched tight to her chest. "Mr. Crane," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what is in that part of the house, but I will not go in there again." "Mrs. Adimi, it's a hallway." "It is not just a hallway," she said firmly. "There is something in this house that does not feel right. And I have worked in many houses, sir. I know the difference." She quit 3 days later. So did the groundskeeper. So did the chef. Victor was alone in the mansion by the end of the second week. It was a local historian named Margaret who showed up uninvited on a Thursday afternoon. She was 70 years old, sharp-eyed, and completely unimpressed by the grand entrance hall. She had come with her son, the structural engineer Victor had called, but it quickly became clear that Margaret was the one with something to say. She walked slowly through each room, trailing her fingers along the walls, pressing her palm flat against the stone of the fireplace, tilting her head at the ceiling as if she were listening for a heartbeat. "Remarkable craftsmanship," she said quietly, more to herself than to Victor. "Whoever laid this stone knew exactly what they were doing." "Yes, well, I had very specific requirements," Victor said. Margaret turned and looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who has said something deeply wrong. "Mr. Crane," she said, "a house like this holds memory. Every wall, every joint, every beam was placed by a human being with a name and a story. Those people poured something of themselves into this building. When you stand in a room and forget the hands that made it, the room doesn't forget. It simply waits. Victor opened his mouth to dismiss her. But something in her voice, calm and certain in a way he had never encountered before, kept the words from coming out. There is a name, he heard himself say. Scratched into the fireplace mantel. Morrow. Margaret went very still. Elias Morrow, she said softly. He was the lead stonemason on this project. He died 6 weeks before the house was finished. Heart attack, on a Saturday morning, right here on this property. She paused. He never saw it completed. Victor looked at the fireplace. He looked at the name carved into the stone, not angry or threatening, just there, quietly insisting on being seen. That night he did not sleep at all. Instead he sat at his desk and pulled up the construction records he had never once looked at. Names scrolled past him in the blue light of his screen. Hundreds of them. He had seen them only as line items in a budget. Now, for reasons he could not entirely explain, he started searching. Elias Morrow, stonemason. Survived by one daughter, Clara, age 34. Darius Osei, site foreman. Immigrated from Ghana 12 years ago. Sent money home every month to bring his family over. They arrived the same week the mansion was completed. Rosa Mendez, framing carpenter. Worked double shifts for 6 months straight. Used the overtime to pay for her mother's cancer treatment. Samuel Adkins, painter, retired. Came back for one last job. His grandson, Tyler, was on the same crew. Victor sat back in his chair. His eyes burned. His chest felt strange and heavy in a way that money had never made him feel and that no achievement had ever touched. He walked through the mansion at midnight, slowly this time, without purpose. He ran his hand along the curved banister of the staircase, smooth as silk, perfectly balanced, the work of someone who had taken enormous pride in getting it exactly right. He stood in the library and looked at the shelves built floor to ceiling, each one level and flush and solid, the work of hands that knew what they were doing. He pressed his palm against the stone of the fireplace the same way Margaret had done, and for the first time he felt the warmth beneath the surface, not from the fire, which was not lit, but from something older and quieter than fire. I didn't build any of this, he said aloud to the empty room. And the house was silent. Not the threatening silence of the past 2 weeks. Something different. Something that felt almost like agreement. Victor Crane spent the next 3 weeks tracking down every worker he could find. He called foremen and subcontractors. He drove to neighborhoods he had never visited. He sat across kitchen tables from people who looked at him with suspicion they had every right to feel, and he told them the truth, that he had never thanked them, that he was ashamed of that, and that he wanted to fix it as much as anything could be fixed. Some of them slammed the door in his face. He understood that too, but enough of them said yes. And on a quiet Sunday in October, Crane Manor held its second gathering. There was no white linen suit this time. No champagne tower. Just long tables set up in the Great Hall, good food, and more than 200 people who had poured 2 years of their lives into the building around them. Victor stood up to speak, and for the first time in his life, he did not talk about himself. He talked about Elias Morrow, who laid every stone in the East Wing with a precision that bordered on obsession and who never got to see the finished result. He had found Clara Morrow in the front row and he spoke directly to her. "Your father's hands are in every wall of this house," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. Every single one. He talked about Darius and Rosa and Samuel and Tyler and 40 others by name, and with each name the room grew warmer and quieter in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. That night, Victor Crane slept soundly for the first time since moving in. No footprints. No flickering lights. No hammers falling in the dark. The house was still, deeply, completely still, the way a place feels when it has finally been given what it was owed. Above the front door of Crane Manor, there is now a small engraving set into the stone. Victor had it added the week after that dinner, and he chose the words himself. It does not say his name. It does not list his achievements. It says only this: built by many hands, forgotten by none. They say a man's home is a reflection of his soul. Victor Crane learned that the hard way. But he learned it. And sometimes, that is everything.